Hello and welcome to In Focus. My name's Greg Peterson, ABC 10 News Director and News Director and owner of Upper Peninsula BreakingNews.com. My guest today is Patrick A. Miles Jr., the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Michigan, which includes basically 2/3 of Michigan, all of the UP and the western half of the lower.
Correct.
Okay, explain to me, for the people out there that don't know, what your office does in the counties and some of the big cities.
Okay, well, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District, we have 49 counties, as you mentioned, in the Upper Peninsula and the western half of the Lower Peninsula. We prosecute all of the federal crimes that are committed in that area. Those range from healthcare frauds, tax frauds, financial frauds like Ponzi schemes, to interstate and international drug trafficking and drug cases, violent crimes, illegal possession of firearms and possession of those by felons, for example. We do cases that involve national security and protecting the borders, and we also have jurisdiction on Indian country. We have 11 federally recognized Native American tribes in this district. That's the most of any of the federal districts that's east of the Mississippi. And so the state of Michigan does not have jurisdiction there. And so the tribes themselves have police departments, and they can prosecute cases that involve Native members. But when there's non-Natives involved and serious felonies, our office would prosecute those cases. We also handle civil cases. We represent the federal government both as a plaintiff and a defendant. So sometimes we might be pursuing a criminal case. We may at the same time be pursuing civil remedies or penalties, or doing that in lieu of a criminal prosecution. And we also might be looking at things like tax liens and things where the federal government is a creditor.
And explain to me about your 3 local assistant U.S. attorneys. Let's start with Martin, Vermont.
Well, in our Marquette office, which covers our northern division, which is the Upper Peninsula Division, we have Martin, Vermont, and Martin prosecutes our drug cases. He is the office manager.
A few months or year. She's Native American, a member of the Sioux tribe. Mm-hmm. Talk to me.
Hannah is an enrolled member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe, as you mentioned. She joined our Marquette office about a year ago, right around December 1st. She had spent about 8 months in our Grand Rapids office before that, getting oriented and training. She had worked as a tribal prosecutor for the Lockview Desert Band in Watersmeet, up here in the Northern Division, for a few years. And so she has a lot of experience and passion for Indian country cases. So that's what she was hired to do, is primarily Indian country prosecutions.
That's what I want to ask you about. As we know, the Indian country, they're sovereign nations amongst themselves, but the federal government still handles any felony that occurs on the tribal. Are you guys aware how they feel about the federal government coming in, and do you think Hannah can help with that? I mean, she knows customs or...
Every year, I go on what we call a tribal tour, and I meet with each tribe in the district, all 11. And there are 5 up here in the Upper Peninsula. And so I meet with each of the tribes, the tribal leaders, their chairman or Ogama, their prosecutor, sometimes their tribal judge, some of the council members, oftentimes their chief of police, and we talk about issues and the relationship between our office and their tribes and their tribe. And so we have very good discussions and good communication. I think they appreciate the work that we do for them and with them as a partner. I know that they've appreciated the fact that Hannah has joined the office. That position of having really almost a dedicated Indian country prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office was very important up here in the Northern Division for the 5 tribes that are here.
Do you know if she's one of the few in the whole Justice Department, or do you have other assistants you know about that are Native American?
I'm sure there are other assistant U.S. attorneys elsewhere. We have 94 offices for U.S. attorneys, but we also have a tribal liaison based in our Grand Rapids office, Jeff Davis, who's also Native American, and so he handles a lot of the liaison work and coordination with the tribes. And he really is a mentor to Hannah, and they do work closely both on the cases that we take in from the tribes, the referrals from the tribal police, for example, deciding what cases we can take, and then working up those cases together as well. And Hannah's also been working, of course, with Paul Lochner on cases up here.
And we'll revisit the tribes in a minute, but before we leave them, one thing I've noticed you've cracked down on is domestic violence. One of the federal judges recently called a case he sentenced up here that your office prosecuted the worst case of domestic violence he's ever seen, just because of the sheer brutality of it. It was on a Native American reservation. Mm-hmm. And so that's a priority with you guys too.
Oh, it is. I mean, we don't normally see domestic violence cases normally because we don't have jurisdiction except for on Native American cases. So we do get those cases, domestic violence cases, and of course we will prosecute those when we can.
Now, moving on here, one thing we'd like to talk about is Project Safe Childhood. As you know better than I do, your office has been cracking down on crimes against children.
Absolutely.
I know of at least 6 cases in the UP. I know there's been some downstate, all this in the last year or two. Talk about why that's important.
Well, it's one of the top 5 priorities in the Department of Justice nationally, which is protecting, one of those priorities is protecting the vulnerable. And it's one of the top priorities that I have as U.S. Attorney as well in the office. So from the federal perspective, what we're prosecuting generally would be child exploitation using the internet. So that would be child pornography, whether it's the downloading or sharing or possession of it, as well as the production of it, which are usually really the bad cases, because that's a hands-on victim that we are aware of that we're prosecuting. So those cases are troubling. The reason that we are really pushing hard is because we want to shut down the market for those. The people that are involved in that, they trade with one another, so they build their collections by sharing what they've created with others. And so we really want to close down that market for child pornography, because there's ripple effects. When a child is being abused, they are very likely to go on to have other problems in their life later on. So these predators are really stealing their innocence, killing their childhood, and they're just causing society a number of problems, and they need to be put away for a long time. And the federal sentences are very severe for child exploitation and pornography.
What are some of the things parents here in the Upper Peninsula should be on the lookout for?
Well, they certainly should monitor their children's use of the internet and be aware that just like a parent wouldn't let a stranger into the house, strangers are coming into the house through that computer screen. And so you really need to know who your kids are interacting with online, because not always people online are who they say they are. And so you really should only contact, or children should only be communicating with people online who they actually know in person, and the parents know who they are.
So you're saying parents should just crack down, it doesn't care, just look at their computer?
Monitor those computers, absolutely.
Don't worry about if they say, oh, that's my private computer.
Well, there is no privacy for children, shouldn't be,
Right.
in terms of the household, because we've seen some really bad cases where children communicating with a stranger online get talked into either sharing explicit photographs and sending those, and then they'll get extorted into sending more and more and more explicit, that they may end up communicating with somebody who is not another kid, who's an adult, who's really trying to manipulate them, maybe even meeting them for sex or for an abduction. So you really need to be careful of who the people are communicating with online, and always tell your kids, do not, under any circumstances, send an explicit photograph of yourself to anybody. That will last forever. You don't know where it can go once you send it, and so that's a very risky thing to do.
And what should they be on the lookout for as far as behavior changes or?
Well, I think some of the things that they can look out for are excessive use of the computer, if they're being secretive about what they're doing on the computer or who they're communicating with. Those are some of the things to be careful of for parents. Also, in terms of mothers and girlfriends, if your boyfriend or husband or someone in the house, a male usually, is spending excessive amount of time on the computer, being very secretive, has a number of different external drives that they're hiding or not letting people know that they have them, keeping multiple computers. Those are some indicators, frankly, of somebody who might be trying to exploit children or looking at child pornography online. So we really want people in the house to be vigilant about the use of the computer as well, to see if there is that kind of activity going on.
You've had a couple of cases in Indian country lately. One was really bad, one involving a Thomas Kane who has, and I should say allegedly because his trial is set for February, and then this other one where you had a Mr. Kugler who is going to be sentenced coming up. These are people that abused children on Indian reservations, allegedly. Mm-hmm. And this one in particular that you charged, it was particularly bad. They made lots of charges out of it. So I'd like you to talk about that kind of thing. It's not just in the Upper Peninsula, it's everywhere.
Oh, it is everywhere. And I really don't want to talk about Mr. Kane specifically because that case is upcoming. But this is so prevalent, and it's grown over the past 20 years. I mean, the increase of child pornography and exploitation cases has grown really almost by 1,000% in the last 20 years. And so we are really seeing a prevalence of this. Our office, we had 23 convictions just this year alone, and we're only up to November. And so we are cracking down on it. Like I said, we're trying to shut down that market as best we can. But we know it's always going to be there, but we're going to remain aggressive and vigilant on these cases to protect the children.
First, tell me about Project Safe Neighborhoods. We don't have quite the gun issues that they have here like you do maybe in the Lower Peninsula, but talk about that.
Well, Project Safe Neighborhood actually is about 10 years old, and it's a problem to address gang and violence in neighborhoods. It's changed a little bit. We now actually call it the Violent Crime Reduction Initiative, and our website doesn't have that reflected yet, so we will get that updated. Right. But so as part of that, I created task forces in the 7 urban areas in my district, and the larger urban areas being Grand Rapids, Lansing, Kalamazoo, Benton Harbor, Muskegon Heights, Holland, Battle Creek. And so what we're working with is the local law enforcement, and we're bringing everybody together. I've assigned a prosecutor from my office to each of those cities to work with local police department, the sheriff's department for the county prosecutor, the Michigan State Police, the FBI, and the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Sitting down, talking together, coming up with a local plan to address violent crime in those communities.
What's happened in our country? I mean, I just want your personal opinion. It seems like school shootings weren't there when I grew up. There weren't a lot of this gang, or at least not as much as you hear. I mean, what's your opinion as a prosecutor about our morals, or I don't know what to describe it as?
Well, that would take a sociological degree to figure out what's going on there. But I think what we are seeing are some people who are lacking familial structure. They don't have the family support they need. They don't have the role models that they need. And so they may not have the education and employment skills that they need. And so they're choosing a life of violent crime, sometimes drug sales and trafficking as well, that goes along with that. And so we are trying to work on that. One initiative that I've brought to the office and I'm pushing really hard is prisoner reentry. Because once someone has served their time in prison, the recidivism rate is extremely high. Nationally, 2/3 of people who are released from prison are back in the criminal justice system within 2 years. That's a terrible return on our investment as taxpayers, even, because we're spending in Michigan approximately $34,000 a year to incarcerate. And so Michigan does have a decent rate of recidivism. It's lower than the national average, but it's still not low enough. And so what we're trying to do is bring together all the different constituencies, employers, social services, because a lot of times the people coming out of prison have behavioral issues, they might have substance abuse issues, that lack of job skills or training, lack of employment opportunities, lack of transportation, lack of housing, lack of role models.
Preventing crime is what you're talking about.
Which exactly. Right. This is a crime prevention program, and so it really benefits everybody, because when someone does go back through the criminal justice system, there's another victim. And there's another arrest, so that's more of a burden on the law enforcement. There's another prosecution, so that's the burden on the prosecutor's office, on the courts, and so on and so forth, and on the prison system. So we're trying to reduce that extra cost going through that again and keeping cycling through. So it is a crime prevention, because we are trying to reduce crime by having people who've been released be adequately rehabilitated so they don't return to prison.
If you don't have a job, I can easily see them going back to a life of crime, and sometimes employers got to give these people a chance.
Absolutely. Very common that people say, I couldn't get a job, so I had to go back to the life of crime. One thing employers can do, I'm not saying give ex-offenders a preference, but just don't have it as an automatic exclusion. It's called check the box, the very first sheet that says your name, address, birthday, and then do you have a conviction? Yes, no. Once they check yes, that's application's gone. Get rid of that and maybe go down to the next level, because a lot of times these convictions may have been so long ago, they may not be relevant to the job that the person is applying for.
And they may have changed.
And they may have changed, exactly.
Let's talk about drugs. First of all, the U.S. Sentencing Commission now has new guidelines that will reduce the levels of offense. So in other words, people get shorter sentences maybe.
That's correct. And these are really applicable for what we consider to be low-level drug dealers, nonviolent, and so they can be eligible for this treatment going forward. And the Sentencing Commission actually made these rules retroactive as well.
And the meth has been a huge problem here in the UP. I've been told personally there's a crackdown going on, but whatever it is, now you talk about meth in the UP, because it really has been a scourge to us up here.
It is a scourge, and there is a vigorous enforcement effort on meth, the production of it. And what you see are two things. You see the individual producers, the people who are cooking it up on their own, and that does happen in rural areas more frequently than it does in urban areas. And then we're also seeing the importation of meth coming up from Mexico through the cartels and so forth. And so meth is very prevalent drug, and it's getting a lot of attention from federal authorities.
And we have a lot of smurfing up here where people, even if they're not addicted, might go buy pseudoephedrine for a relative, a friend, a neighbor, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you guys regulating the pseudoephedrine? I mean, is it coming in from Canada, in other words, or
well,
is it people faking colds, or
Well, there were some regulations several years ago that were put into place to limit the amount that people could get and the information they have to give to get it. One thing that we can monitor are the ingredients for meth, and if people are purchasing those ingredients, that is something that that law enforcement is able to track down, and especially in substantial quantities, and then begin an investigation from there. So, law enforcement is aware of what it takes to make meth, and they're following up on that.
And it's expensive to clean up too.
And very dangerous. I mean, you do hear about people blowing themselves up, literally.
We had a case like that up here,
yes.
as a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
Now, moving to prescription drugs, speaking of ingredients, I guess that people are turning to heroin if they can't get their prescription drugs anymore because heroin's cheaper.
Yeah.
And you guys, and I want to say, we know that you have a major investigation underway involving a heroin ring from Chicago to the UP, but just talk about it.
Well, there's been an incredible growth in the use and abuse of prescription drugs, particularly painkillers. And so as that increase is happening, people are becoming more and more addicted to the painkillers, to the opiates, the oxys, etc. What's happening is the effect on the body from those oxys and opiates is the same high that people are getting from heroin. Pills are expensive, and so heroin is not. And so what people are doing is once they run out of their supply of the pills, once they're getting hooked on those pills, then they're moving on to heroin. And they never would have imagined themselves to be intravenous drug users, but now they're doing that because they're chasing that high. And there's no standardization of quality or purity for heroin, so people are injecting themselves, and they might get a more pure batch, and then they end up killing themselves or overdosing because it was a higher concentration of heroin than they're used to. This is something parents and adults need to be very careful of in their house with those painkillers, because children are getting into those medicine cabinets and stealing those pills. So people need to keep track of the painkillers that are in their house and they need to dispose of them properly. Typically going to a police station. In the future, the regulations change, they're going to be able to take those back to a pharmacy. But you need to dispose, not flush down the toilet, but you do need to dispose of those painkillers and monitor them carefully, especially when you have children in the house.
And there are more efforts for proper disposal sites. I only want to ask you one more question, and we're out of time really, but I got to ask you. Eric Holder became the 82nd Attorney General of the U.S. in 2009, the first African American to run the Justice Department. He's leaving now.
He is. He's one of the longest serving Attorney Generals in American history. Eric Holder has done a lot of things, a lot of initiatives that have been very positive for the United States. He's really taken on the issue of the nonviolent drug offenders, because federal prisons are 40% over capacity.
And no parole.
And there is no parole in the federal system. So that's an unsustainable track. And so that's why he's really pushed some of these efforts, what he's calling the Smart on Crime initiative, which is really changing some of the approaches that prosecutions are taking. So he's made a very lasting impact, I think, on federal prosecutions. I think a lot of those policies that he's initiated are going to continue well after he leaves.
Boy, we could make this an hour. My guest, Patrick A. Miles, Jr., the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Michigan. I'm Greg Peterson. See you next time.